The additional Braves already making a little bit of an impact, not a ton when you look at the box score, but an impact nonetheless. It's all brought to you by plainscoffee.com. Promo code Braves, 10% off. He's Lindsay Crosby. I'm Ben Taylor. Welcome in. Braves today. Jorge Soler starts off or leads off during the game, had won 6 or 7 home series in a row. So the Braves were breaking that streak. And although he went 0 for 3, Lindsay, still his presence in the lineup impacted a lot of other guys, I think.
Yeah. What is it that Anthopoulos told us on Tuesday after the trade deadline? They targeted him for his power and his on-base ability. So
yes,
he gave some of the on-base ability by drawing a walk, which set the stage for Austin Riley to drive in 2 runs, which gave Atlanta the lead because every home run they hit in this series was a solo shot. So getting guys on base is kind of the key.
That's my number one pet peeve with this team. When they do hit home runs, nobody's ever on base.
Yeah, and so now, not Travis d'Arnaud's fault.
Right.
The guy in front of him hit home runs twice, but yeah, it's definitely on base is something they have to work on. You saw Jorge Soler get on base, had a couple defensive opportunities in right field, made those without issue. They subbed him out late in the game. I think after the 7th inning, Ramon Laureano came in for the last 2 innings. They said after the game, no sort of injuries. He just hasn't played the field a lot this year. They didn't want to push it too hard. He did just he flew in late last night. They didn't want it to be too much. But I do think you'll probably see more of that going forward, simply because if it's a close game late, get a better defender out there. You've got the guys on the roster. Go ahead and do it. And so I think you'll see more of that. But all in all, good, successful first outing for Jorge Soler. And even though he didn't hit a bomb, Travis d'Arnaud, after the game, talking to Bally Sports, said that everybody in the clubhouse felt a little bit more power because Jorge Soler's back. And so that's why he was able to hit 2 home runs in the game, is because Jorge Soler's back. So it's working either way.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that it brings a different mood. The guys love him.
The vibes are so good.
Yes, it is. And the pregame, I was able to watch pregame before I had to start playing dad and running around everywhere and all this kind of stuff. And after that, I listened. So watch pregame, and they had him on ahead of time. That was the first time he found out that Anthopoulos had actually tried to trade for him prior, which he was very excited about. He lit up. Also, it was hilarious because the manager for the Giants called him to let him know he'd been traded, and he was playing PlayStation, apparently, he said. And he was like, oh, okay, cool. And he hung up the phone, and then he thought, wait a second, he just told me I got traded. Like, it hit him after he had hung up the phone that he was leaving.
The call was over. Yeah.
And so and so then he had to get in touch with his agent and all that kind of, and as you talked about, getting in late. And then to hear Anthopoulos in the game with his in-game interview that he did on television, where he talked about, he said the same, he backed that up, tried to get him at one point in time before, but then talked about his assets, like you just said, talked about his own base ability. People saying he's a defensive liability. He's not. He is not a defensive lie. He plays better defense than people give him credit for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Atlanta had all their internal.
He didn't have an error last
year. He played over 240 defensive innings for the Marlins in 2023 in right field, didn't have an error. Now, obviously, if you have poor range, you just won't get to balls to commit an error. But the point is, he did that. And Anthopoulos did tell the media when he talked to us on Tuesday afternoon that some of their internal stuff graded out better. Obviously, they saw him up close when he played in that Truist Park right field down the stretch in 2021. They have confidence that his arm can play in right. He's not just a defensively limited left field guy like a Kyle Schwarber or somebody like that.
Right.
And that his overall speed is pretty respectable. It just takes him a while to get up to speed because of the size. And so they're not too worried about it. And on the note of trying to trade for him, Anthopoulos gave us some times. They said they almost got him at the 2022 deadline. It ended up not going through. They got Raisel Iglesias, the closer, one of your favorite players, from the Angels instead. And then they revisited that same deal in the offseason with Miami and thought they were going to be able to get him heading into the 2023 season and weren't able to work it out. And so I think that's kind of why you ended up seeing the outfield being Eddie Rosario, Kevin Pillar platoon there in left field. instead. But they've wanted to get him. They didn't try to get him last offseason as a free agent because they were pretty set. But I think, and Anthopoulos mentioned.
He said that in the booth too. He said, I knew he was going to cost a bunch of money, so I didn't go after him as a free agent. I did find it interesting, though, what the stuff you're talking about. It's phenomenal. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah, and Anthopoulos did say that, like, we've had to go get bats every year he's been here, right? Like, injuries are going to happen. And so he would rather, his word that he used, I thought it was interesting, his word that he used on Tuesday's Zoom with us, with the media, was overbook. They overbooked the bullpen. They got more guys than they could reasonably use, knowing somebody was going to be hurt, right? And so you haven't really had a scenario where Atlanta needed a quality reliever and didn't have one. Right? You may have had something where a guy was down because he pitched the last 2 days, but they didn't have a situation where they needed a reliever and just didn't have that guy on the roster because you have all this depth. Same situation here with the outfield going into 25 now. And there's a story on BraveToday.com all about Jorge Soler and how the outfield and DH is going to work in 2025 based off what Anthopoulos told us on Tuesday.
He talked about it a little bit, the trade deadline. I did find it just what you said and what we've talked about constantly. They were going after young arms. Everybody was asking for Schwellenbach. And so the
player they got asked about the most was Spencer Schwellenbach.
Yes. And I thought it was hilarious, as he even said, we kind of expected, but he said, I thought it was hilarious that every team I talked to, that was the name that came up. And so, but he went on to talk about Soler a little bit. And then they asked him, they said, did you think about it was kind of a dead day on the day before? Because you'd made that deal on Monday late, and it was a dead day on Tuesday. And he said they had plans. He didn't give anything away, but he said they had plans that just didn't come to fruition. However, I was going to ask you, and we've got articles up about this, but the folks that are going to be listening to this on an ABCDF grading scale, what would you give the Braves as far as their pickup at the trade deadline?
I think, given the fact that they have a lot of confidence in Max Fried and Ronaldo Lopez and what the situations with them right now, Fried through a bullpen today, we heard it went great. Lopez reportedly feels much better. The expectation is the 2 TBAs for this weekend are going to be those 2 guys. I think you can argue that it's a B, right? It's hard for me to say A simply because if you have an injury in the rotation, which obviously can happen, you're going to be struggling a little bit to have another quality arm you feel comfortable plugging into a postseason start. But at the same time, if you go back and you look at the hitters that actually moved at the deadline, Jorge Soler is probably one of the better guys, especially the last month and a half, 2 months with his OPS over 800. So I'm going to say it's a B right now, simply because I don't really think you gave up. Apologies to Tyler Matzik. I don't think you gave up anything of value for the future. Nope. I don't know if he was even in this loaded bullpen. I don't even know if he was going to be able to pitch for you in 2024. And Sabine Ceballos is an interesting prospect. He is lower in the prospect rankings and is in a tweener position because his defense is good enough for short. His power's not enough for third base. He's in a weird place there. But it's got to be at least a B for me, simply because you didn't overpay for anybody. You didn't go over that third luxury tax. He was very adamant about that as well. And we have an article on that as well, because I was going to ask that question. Somebody beat me to it. And you took care of arguably 2 needs, because you needed an outfielder, but you also needed a leadoff hitter. And Jorge Soler is able to give you that. He is starting an inning, leading an inning. He has the highest on-base percentage in all of baseball. Stat I didn't realize until Bally Sports threw it up today. I knew he was over 350 as a leadoff hitter, but when he's the first batter in an inning, even this season with his poor start he has an on-base of like 381. You love to see something like that. So I'm going to give it a B. I want to go higher, but I'm going to give it a B, maybe a B plus, I guess.
See, and I went with B minus. Okay. With a lot of ifs that you just mentioned just a minute ago. If Fried is fine, if Lopez is fine, if Michael Harris II ends up coming back at least for some postseason play or towards the end of the season and gets hot, and if this this lineup starts hitting, which we'll get to momentarily, and when
Yeah.
you start talking about the Austin Rileys and the Matt Olsons and even the Denards of the world. But first, it's all brought to you by Plains Coffee. Go to plainscoffee.com. Promo code BRAVES. You get all the coffees you want. You can get teas if you want. Also, flavored coffee. And they're not going to roast the beans until you make your order, and they'll ship them to your door. It is plainscoffee.com. Promo code BRAVES. Get your 10% off. I have ripped him a new one over the last probably 2 weeks in Matt Olson and how, let's just call it, poor his performance has been. I think he knows it. You've seen him throw the bat down a few times, which you never see that sort of anger out of him whenever he does that, misses a pitch or whatever. But these last few games, he has turned it on, and it has been impressive that he is working his way out of probably the worst he's hit in quite a while. And it seems to be headed in a positive direction.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to replicate 54 homers from last year. That ship has sailed. But he's hit 4 homers in the last couple days. In his last 8 games, he's 9 for 30 in his last 8 games. And the big thing to me, we talked about this, I think, a couple weeks ago. I know I wrote about it. But both of his home runs today came on fastballs. Mm-hmm. And he had been late on fastballs. One of the big glaring things that stood out was how late he was on fastballs. You would see at bats, and you could always look. It was always fun to look, not fun, but interesting to look on MLB Game Day and see, the little strike zone at the end, and see, look at this middle fastball that he swung and missed on. Like, that's a pitch that would have been crushed last year. Mm-hmm. Both of these home runs today in this 2-homer day came on fastballs. And I want to say, I think one of them was over 95, like 96 or something. And so that feels good. He had a quote in post game that the traveling beat got, acknowledging he's been behind on fastballs. He feels much better in that situation now than he did even 2 weeks ago. So maybe the All-Star break reset thing did him some good, and maybe he's back. And if he can hit not even 2023 Matt Olson, but if he can just do career norms, Matt Olson, the top of this lineup, even before you get Ozzie back, of Soler, Riley, Ozuna, and Olson, is right there potentially as up there with almost any other top 4 in baseball as far as how much those guys can hurt you all the way through and what they can do. So him having this strong series and the way that he did it, hitting fastballs that he had missed all year, is a big deal to me.
If he comes around, Murphy comes around, as you talked about, Ozzie coming back, possibly Harris II coming back. I mean, you're talking about a lineup towards the end of the year when that push gets made in order to maintain a wild card lead or make up ground on the Phillies. Lindsay, this is the lineup that you and I were kind of hoping for when the season began, and then everything just fell apart because of Acuna, and then not to mention everything on top of that after that. It fell apart. And so if the confidence is getting there because of Soler coming back to be a Brave, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I'm going to give him all the credit in the world. But if it stays there, this could be a potentially dangerous lineup to face come September.
Yeah, and he addressed that on Tuesday. Alex Anthopoulos said, look at the last couple World Series runs, right? The Diamondbacks last year, the Phillies the year before that. Were they the best teams in baseball when they got to the postseason? No, they were wild card teams. But the offense got hot. They had good starting pitching. They had a good bullpen. He said, we feel like we have a really good and deep rotation right now. Everybody's healthy. We have a really good and deep bullpen. And we have an offense that is capable of a lot more than they've shown to this point in the season. And back, and I think it was in January, and I tweeted this back out last night after the AA presser. Back in January when I interviewed John Smoltz, one of the big things that he talked about is the key to win in the postseason. You need 3 hot starters, you need 3 hot relievers, and you need 3 hot hitters. And you can see how Atlanta has the guys to hit all 3 of those things. You can see Chris Sale getting hot in the postseason. You can see Max Fried getting hot in the postseason, right? Look at the offense. You can see Ozuna staying hot. You can see Soler getting hot. We've seen that before. You can see Olson getting hot finally. And so at this point, I don't know if you're going to chase down the Phillies for the division or not, but at this point, what's important is getting into the postseason and giving yourself a chance to get hot and make a run, because the postseason, the sample sizes, it's so fluky. It's so based on momentum and who is hot. You have the guys that when they're hot, they're some of the best in baseball. The question now, assuming you make it, which I'm going to continue to assume they are, because you've actually gained a couple games on Philly. You're 6.5 games back right now. Assuming they make it, the question is, do you have enough guys get hot to make a run? You didn't in 23. You didn't in 22. You did in 21. So we've seen both sides of this.
All the information can be found at Braves Today. Go to bravestoday.com. You'll see a bunch of write-ups. There's going to be stuff coming throughout the weekend. I know we're only halfway home as far as the week is concerned, but the series, we'll do a little recap, or I'll do a little recap, whenever the Braves and Marlins face off. And so now is the time with Soler back, and then we still don't know what Luke Jackson's going to do, because he got in late. But did they take separate flights? Because they keep acting like Jackson got there later than Soler.
They were on the plane together.
Okay.
From what I understand, just from people that I've talked to in the past and even stuff like that, Luke Jackson is very much not a morning person. And so they got in late last night. This morning, Soler got to the ballpark before Jackson did, because he hates day games. He is not a morning person. At some point in time, I'm going to go pull his career stats for day games versus night games to see if there's a giant discrepancy. But it's just like they flew in on the same flight. They fought over who got the window seat. But today they arrived at different times. And actually, I'm right here real quick if I can do it. I'm curious if Luke Jackson is significantly worse in day games than night games.
The way they kept talking about it is they kept on saying, "Where's Jackson? Where's Jackson?" And I thought, did they come in different flights? And then that's what made me think that. So I think that's absolutely hilarious. So Luke, we're glad to have you back. We don't know what kind of impact you're going to have on as far as the mound is concerned. Yes.
Okay, I love when these things work out. Luke Jackson in night games has a career ERA of 3.90. Luke Jackson in day games has a career ERA of 4.99. It's more than a run worse in day games because he hates day games.
Maybe he was late on purpose to the office today. Maybe that's what it was.
He walks more guys in day games than night games. He gives up more runs. He strikes out less guys. It's science, you guys.
That's phenomenal. So be sure to catch those type nuggets at bravestoday.com. Lindsay, as always, I greatly appreciate it, man.
Thanks, buddy.